Okay, so we're going to just get started because it's 11. Hello, my name is Anisa, and I am a French teacher and a florist. I have also spent the last year and a bit volunteering some time with Oceanwise Youth. We also have Frankie here who's helping me on the tech side. So if you wanted to ask any questions, I know sometimes it's hard to remember your questions at the end of a session. You're more than welcome to type them in the chat, and we're keeping track of them. So we'll answer them at the end. And yeah, we're going to start with a land acknowledgement. My eye's going to be focused here because my notes and my screen's here. So sorry if I'm not giving you direct eye contact, but it's fine. We're going to start with a land acknowledgement. We want to acknowledge that this work, a lot of our work has been done across the stolen, ancestral, and occupied lands of the Coast Salish people, specifically Semiahmoo, Katzie, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Kikate, Tsawwassen, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. We're grateful for these Indigenous peoples that have always cared for these lands, waters, and airs, and continue to do so today despite the injustices that have been and are currently being enacted by the settler colonial state known as Canada. We don't want this to feel like we're checking off a box. I feel like land acknowledgements are only meaningful if we're demonstrating how the work we're doing is actively decolonial, where we're using our settler privilege to make space for Indigenous voices, beliefs, and bodies. So we're hoping to make those connections for you today during our presentation. And Frankie has typed in a really good resource if you wanted to learn a little bit about the land that you are on. Let me move over here. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is just go through our agenda. We're going to start with an opening reflection. We're going to talk a little bit about what is Oceanwise and Oceanwise Youth and some of the projects that I did with them, specifically what I've done in the classroom as a language teacher and as support for teachers who are trying to navigate ocean literacy in the curriculum. We're going to share some resources and talk a little bit about how you can get involved with us, a closing reflection, and then, of course, any questions or feedback. I'm always looking for feedback in my practice or for the presentation. So our first thing we're going to do is just an opening reflection to kind of ground ourselves a little bit. I think it's really important for us to make a personal connection to place. I feel like that's how we can actively care for a place. So I want you to think about your favorite body of water and why it's important to you. I have an image here of Whitecliff. Whitecliff is on this stolen Musqueam First Nation land here in BC. And it's a place that I've recently discovered in the last 5 years. So it's important to me because I'm actively making memories there. It's also pretty far for me, so I'm having to learn how to maintain my anxiety, which is really important. And I feel like it's a really good place to feel like you're not so disassociated from the environment. You have to be very conscious of your movement there. There's sea stars and seals and a little reef. So that's why it's important to me. So maybe you can pop in the chat if you have a favorite body of water. Maybe it's a place you've never even been before and you're curious about it. And then we can maybe read about them. I'll give a moment for that. Wow. So it is not 11 a.m. for you. It is 2, I guess. Wow, Nova Scotia? All right, very cool to see where you guys are coming from. I agree. Rivers are really awesome, especially since I don't teach too close to the ocean. So something that we'll do is we'll take the kids out to ravines and rivers that are nearby, and I think they really enjoy that too. It kind of locates us a little bit more in regard to the ocean, because I feel like when we talk about our waterways, we specifically focus on the ocean, but it's important to talk about rivers too. Okay, very nice to see where you guys are all coming from. We're going to talk a little bit about, sorry, I'm still learning how to use this. Who is OceanWise? So OceanWise is a nonprofit organization where we try to empower communities to shape a globally sustainable future, specifically through research, education, and business partnerships. We see that there are three main challenges that we are facing that we as people are facing, and as well our waterways are facing. And that's climate change, ocean pollution, and overfishing. So you'll see here that we have these 5 initiatives that are founded on those 3 challenges, and we place youth at the center so that we can equip them to move through the world addressing these challenges, because they're obviously not going to go away. And so that brings me to Ocean Bridge. So Ocean Bridge is a program where people across Canada, young folks across Canada can volunteer their time to lead service projects in their communities. And there's an aspect where you can do it individually and with a team as well. And then we hope to continue supporting them after their year or season is done, so that they're moving into the world with those initiatives in mind. And so I was a participant last year, and I'm still doing continued work. And I did about 3 projects. One was to curate love letters from artists through art into a little community zine where we collected donations for Indigenous communities across Canada who don't have clean drinking water. And then we also did like a social media event where we gave space on our platforms and in our blog and our newsletter to highlight Indigenous artists and their work in the community. And then the last thing, which is more of my continued project, which is why I'm here today, is to talk to you a little bit about how I'm integrating this work into my classroom. So as mentioned, I'm a French teacher. I teach high school and elementary, but I'm currently working in elementary. And so when I started Ocean Bridge, the question was, how can we move away from this very Western way of teaching language where it stays in the classroom? It's very worksheet oriented. And how do we make it a little bit more relevant in this world, especially this climate? And so the very first thing I do when I start a unit with my kids for this, so I do a specific unit called Écolos within my French teaching, so we can like overtly talk about these themes. And then we also try to integrate it into other units, like, for example, art. Art is a really great way to be outside and talk about what you're seeing in shapes, colors, and feelings. But specifically within this unit of Écolos, when we're talking about environment work, the very first question I'll ask my students is, does this restoration work happen only in English, or does it happen across the world in a bunch of different languages? And obviously the answer is it's happening across the world. It's something that we're all facing. And so it kind of allows students to locate themselves in this work, making it a little bit more relevant to them. And so then we talk a little bit about the how. And we try to move away from language, like I said, being centered at like a desk, and more outside, so that it's problem solving. So we do projects. So for example, I have like a couple pictures here of one of the projects we did where we were using language learning French to look at the effects of the types and different effects of litter that we find at our school community, and where they would end up if they made their way through the storm drains. For us, that's Mud Bay. And so what we did was we first went out and did a little data collection at our school where we would sort the different types of litter we were finding and collect it and look at the impacts. And then we would we're really lucky where we have this very transparent infrastructure system. So that like an interface online that you can use to see where our storm drains are leading. And so we use that to track where our litter would end up. So the Nicomel River and then into Mud Bay. And so we first did litter collection here, and then we did the same thing at Blackie Spit, which is a part of Mud Bay, and then we compared. And we did this with two purposes, obviously being more proactive in the community and trying to go back to our waterways and help restore them. But we also were really clear about the language learning intents as well, which at the time we were learning, I believe it was like il y a and il y avait, like the differences between past and present. And then some articles like de and whatnot, il y a de quelque chose. So this is just one of our classes, like at the ocean and at our school, what we found, the different categories that we came up with. And then some other things that we did was, doesn't have to necessarily be ocean or water related. I think environment work in general is really good for the kids. So one of the other projects we did was learn a little bit about the importance of pollinators. And we're at the same time, we're also learning about like ER verbs in French and following commands. So we did a little bit of jardinage where we garden in our school community. And so, again, with two intents, which I think it's really important to be clear about those. I always try to make them clear for myself and for the students as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go to Oceanwise specific lessons. But yeah. And moving on to Oceanwise specific lessons, I was really lucky at the school that I was at. They gave me collaboration time to go in and support teachers who are trying to navigate ocean and water literacy in the curriculum. And so what we did was we tried to take the learning outside, but we also used some of the knowledge that we learned from Oceanwise to help ground our teachings. So for example, teachers would often find, like, there's so much that you can talk about. And so I think teachers were often very intimidated to get into the topics. And so a really good place to start for us was looking at, again, those three challenges that Oceanwise has laid out for us to look at, which is ocean pollution, climate change, and overfishing. And so that's usually where we started. But before you can introduce those kinds of themes, especially for the young kids, you have to make sure that they know why we're talking about that. What is water? So I usually start with a simple question so that it kind of guides your organization of how things go, but also it's easy for the kids to understand and respond to as well. So the first question I'll ask any grade level is, what is water? And so I think it'd be a fun little experiment to see what you guys would say if someone came into your class and asked you, what is water? So you can type it in the chat. I did a workshop with some adults on the weekend, and even they came up with water is wet. So there's no wrong answer here. It's just a really good place to get kids to start thinking about what is water. Water is life, which is a good one. Some kids will answer with like H2O, which is a very scientific response, but it's also very, I think, disassociates us from water. Like we think of water as something else. But if we bring in words like life and survival, it really puts us in relationship with water. And so that's something that we try to highlight, that this isn't just about things that we look at or drink. It's something that we need. It's essential, a human right. Yeah. And so this is where we try to include Indigenous voices in the classroom. So we'll talk about what is water and why is it important. Those are our first questions. And then there's this really good resource. So I've curated a list of resources for us, and we'll share them at the end of the Google Doc or whenever Frankie's ready to. And one of the websites is called Decolonizing Water. And it's a website where a bunch of Indigenous folks have put together projects, essays, just activities for you to do in your personal time, but it's also really good for teachers as well. And so I found this really good video called Water is Knowledge, and it's about 1.5 minutes. And it's an Anishinaabe thinker explaining the importance of water to them. And so what we'll do, especially for the young ones, we'll play it once, and we want to make sure that they're hearing it in the original language that it was thought in, because if you're translating languages, if you like, for example, if you're translating from an Indigenous language to an English language, a colonial language, you can put your colonial lens on it. So it's really important to hear that original language, even if the kids don't quite understand it. And then we'll play it a second time since it's so short. And I'll read aloud the subtitles for them, which have been translated directly by the people who made the video, which is really important. And that way they're getting to hear the importance of water from people in their community, Indigenous folks in their community. And then the next thing we do after that is start with those three, or move on to those three themes. So I always start with visuals. The first thing we'll do is look at, like, for example, this visual of a plastic bag, and you can just ask kids, what do you see? I feel like these images are really easy to understand for kids. That's why I've chosen them. And they'll just tell you, what is it, why it's harmful, and then try to point out things that you want them to focus on. So something that we talk a lot about is factories and how they're like the enemy. We talk about how not only do they contribute to climate change by releasing pollution into the air, but how they're also releasing pollution into waterways, specifically like wells. And then we transition to talking about not just fish and wildlife, but humans as well. So now we're seeing how these themes are interdisciplinary. They don't just address science, but they're talking about how there's a bunch of people in Canada who can't drink from their wells because we have factories polluting them. And so some activities we did around that were we watched some videos, we listened to some Indigenous voices, and we wrote letters to Trudeau about it, which I'll circle back to. But I first wanted to talk a little bit about the overfishing aspect, because when you look at this image, like, I don't think a lot of kids imagine fishing to look like this, or they've never seen something like this. And so I try to make it something that they can relate to. So we bring it back to a local species. So for example, we talk about how our resident orcas have a pretty small population compared to our transient orcas on the BC coast, and why that is, because they're both facing climate change. They're both facing ocean pollution, but transient orcas, they eat other things other than fish. They eat like sea lions and seals. And so they have a pretty big, they have more food that they can eat. Whereas our resident orcas, they eat mostly Chinook salmon. So what's the difference here? If we look back to our 3 goals, if it's not climate change or ocean pollution, because they both are experiencing that, it must be, overfishing. And so we talk a little bit about why that matters, because I don't think people realize why whales matter. Out of curiosity, why are whales important to us? You can just pop that in the chat, and then I'll tell you the answer, because it's a fun answer. Why do you think whales are important? If you have any guesses. No guesses? Okay, I will let you know. Yeah, that's a really good answer. Yeah. But another one, which I love telling kids because they just go wild when they hear it, is carbon sink, but also their poo. We talk about how, what do we use for plants on Earth? Like, what do we use to fertilize plants? We use cow poo. Whales are like the cows of the ocean. And so, it's like my favorite thing to tell kids. They break out. And then it's totally okay for them to talk about whale poo for the rest of the day. But then it brings us back to, humor also is nice, but it also brings us back to a local population like Chinook salmon. We need, if Chinook salmon are being overfished too much, our orca whales they are going down. And then we don't have whale poo to fertilize some plants and little ecosystems in our community. And so, there's so much that's important in our ecosystem. And then also thinking about the different coastal communities that rely on some of these as food sources too, which we have a book that I really love reading with the kids, and I'll show a picture of that later. And then so after we talk a little bit about what each of these themes are, it's really important to circle back to those questions again. What is it? Why is it harmful? And what can you do to take action? And so we let kids draw it if that's what makes them feel more comfortable to show their understanding, or write. Some kids prefer writing, and they work in groups. And this is a way of evaluating and assessing what they've understood from each of these 3 topics. Yeah. Another thing that we like to use are education kits. So OceanWise has a bunch of education kits that you can sign out. And over the past year, I've been using a biodiversity kit, a whale kit, and a fishing kit. And so after we have those beginning conversations about what ocean restoration is and how we can take action, because it's hard for kids to go out and see an orca whale, or go out to see a dolphin, or see what the size of a salmon is, because you also don't want proximity as a problem, and then you also want to be careful with disrupting the environment. We bring that stuff to them. And so the kits are really great because it gives kids an opportunity to kind of get close to some of these themes that we've been talking about in a more applicable way. Something that's really important, though, is you can't just show up with a bunch of bones and let the kids touch everything. I think it's really important to guide their learning still. You don't have to be like super controlling over it. You do want to make sure that you're giving responsibility to the kids for their own learning. And so what I'll do, and what you can kind of see in the pictures here, is I've made like a little foldable notebook so that the kids can practice their observational skills. And we kind of frame it in a way like, be a scientist and observe the touch or the texture and the color and the size. And that will get them using the magnifying glasses and kind of looking at specific details of the animals the skeletons of the animals. We try to really circle back to those questions about why is overfishing bad. So one of the activities, I think actually, yeah, here it is. One of the activities involves the kids matching the image of a fish to the fillet, which is a really good way to get kids comfortable with or familiar with knowing what kind of fish they're eating, especially since quite a few of our fish populations are sensitive. And so in these kind of stations, we try to make sure that we're asking questions in their notebooks, like, have you eaten any of these fish? Did you know what they looked like? Why is overfishing bad? What can you do to make sure that you're being careful about what fish you're eating, so that you're still addressing those questions throughout even the more fun parts of learning. We also have a humpback whale fluke matching kit. So we've talked a little bit about why whales are important, and that, researchers in OceanWise will track the health of some of our whales as an indication of the health of the ecosystem. And so we ask kids to be a scientist and pretend that they're trying to track some whales and they're having to match flukes together. I believe there's more OceanWise kits as well. These are just some of the ones that I thought were really useful and relevant for our kids, especially since we were starting with those three themes of overfishing, biodiversity, and whales, which I guess ties into overfishing. But yeah, this is an example of one of our grade 4 classes. So you can adjust the level of language to the class, which is really important. You don't want to, like with the kindergartens, grade 1s and grades 2s, we tried really hard not to use buzzwords and jargon that they wouldn't understand. Simply asking them is, why is taking too much fish from the ocean bad? We'll start to get them thinking about that, which is really important. And then as they move up, they'll start to learn a little bit more about the complexities with these terms. But you don't need to start with them right away, especially since they're developing their understanding of even what water is, like our first question. And then because some of these kids don't know what a wolf eel looks like, or a giant squid beak, which you can kind of see pictured here, we make sure that there are laptops or iPads. And then for the young grades, we have fish friends, which are recruits from the grade 6 and 7s who'll come in and help the kindergartens and the grade 1s find an image of like a giant squid in our ocean. Yeah. And then, as I kind of mentioned before, we like to make sure that we're not specifically talking about our waterways in a very disassociated way. We want to make sure that we're including the themes of people as well. And so what the teacher chooses to move forward with after our collaboration is totally up to them. And then if they need further support, I'll come in and further support them. So for example, some teachers wanted to go more the scientific route. And so I would come in with water testing kits, and we would do water testing in the ravine behind the school. Some teachers really resonated with First Nation, advocating for First Nations having clean drinking water. So I have a couple pictures here of some letters at our school. We wrote maybe about 280 letters to Trudeau to get on that. But this is a really good activity for you guys or for students to show their comprehension. So there's some videos that I put in the resource list and articles. And also, this is a really good way to evaluate literacy as well, being able to formulate a letter, being able to express feelings, which are important parts of the BC curriculum anyways. Yeah. One of the other projects I did was to highlight Indigenous voices on our social media. And so it just so happened that the projects that I did kind of overlapped really well. We got some really nice stories that were very matter of fact and easy to read for the kids. And so one of them was from a residential school survivor, and he shared with us his story about how he would sneak off in the middle of the night to go harvest seafood from the shores, and to sustain him and the other kids at the residential school as they were being harmed and malnutritioned. And so this was a really good story for the kids to read and do like a literary analysis, or even just sit with for a little bit. And I think it's really important to support those marginalized voices, because we find in textbooks that it's very Western. Like I was looking through, I believe it was our BC grade 5 curriculum textbook, and it was talking about how renewable resources are being defined as infinite. But we know that that's a very colonial way to look at resources here, because they're not infinite if you're polluting them or harming them, right? They're actually quite finite. And so when you look for different stories or different knowledge from other people in the community, you can really not only highlight those different wisdoms, but you can also do analyses and compare, which is really great, for example, in social studies. So we're trying to make it more interdisciplinary, as opposed to this just being about science. There's also some really good educators around here. We have an Indigenous educator in Delta who he's an outreach worker, so he'll come in and talk to kids, but he will, ever since COVID, he has started creating videos online talking about his family stories, but also about how his family fishes, which is really awesome, because you get to kind of see someone in close proximity with you in your community going out and fishing in a healthier and more responsible way. So we've linked him in our resource list as well for you, if you ever wanted to check it out. But things that are really important is to be responsible with this wisdom and knowledge that you're looking for. If you are ever unsure, ask, and make sure that the stories that you're sharing are coming from an authentic way, because you don't want to be like with the video. You want to make sure you don't want to be putting your colonial lens on something. You want to make space for the authentic story, for the authentic science. And so for example, when we were doing our litter pickup activity, we were hoping to do it in Mud Bay, which is traditional Semiahmoo First Nation land. And I had no idea if I was allowed to be organizing a field trip for litter collection there. And so I just called the Semiahmoo First Nation office, and they were like, yeah, if you want, we can put you in touch with the chief, Harley Chappell. And they did. And he came out and not only helped us, but he also shared stories about the land, not in general, but like specific to Semiahmoo. So he shared just stories about how White Rock came to be, and it was just really nice. So you get to kind of learn about different wisdom and knowledges in a respectful way, in a way that isn't impeding on someone else's land. So that's just my recommendation. Just ask and reach out. Yeah. This was a book that I was talking about earlier. It's called Jigging for Halibut. It's by Robert Davidson, who also lives, I believe he's Haida, but he lives on the Semiahmoo First Nation land. And he wrote this with his daughter, Sarah Florence Davidson. And this was a really good, at the end of our overfishing discussion, we would read this book as a way to kind of, again, close that gap of disassociation between us and fishing, or folks who fish, because this talks about a family who goes out and fishes just like us. So that's a really good resource that we've linked for you as well. And again, it's very matter of fact. I think it's really important to include resources that are very easy for kids to understand and that don't go too over people's heads. Of course, unless you're looking at literary analyses for older grades. Yeah, so I think we're getting closer to ending. So we wanted to quickly talk about some ways you could get involved, or if you have any students or youth that you think would be interested. You can apply for Ocean Bridge, which is what I did. 15 to 30, which is awesome because I'm 27 and I'm considered youth. 30 considered youth. And you can carry on they have an alumni program that will help you, that will support you if you want to continue your project. So for example, I'm technically done my year, but I still get to use the education kits, which is really awesome. Yeah, education kits, I think, are also linked in the resource list. And that's something that I don't know if it's relatively new, but I just finding out about it, is that you can request Oceanwise online programming. So if you're still feeling like you're not too sure where to start or what topics to address, even after you've covered those three foundations, the overfishing, pollution, and climate change, you can look at the topics that some of our educators here can live stream with you and your kids. I believe that there is a superhero shark workshop happening soon, which sounds really cute. And it's on October 12th from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. And it's for primary kids, which I think it's really hard to talk to primary kids about this because they're still developing so much understanding of the world. And so it might be really nice to have some support. And this is a fun little image of how excited we are about it. Yeah. Before we move on to questions, we did want to do a nice closing reflection. Hopefully, but if not, that's okay. But hopefully you've gotten some ideas about how you can engage the young community. And I just wanted to pose this question back to your favorite body of water. What threatens it? And is there a way to, what threatens it and what can you do? Maybe it is community work with young folks. And so maybe just pop in the chat for the next couple minutes and then we'll move on to questions. So again, what threatens your favorite body of water and what can you do to help it? Maybe keeping in mind those themes of overfishing, ocean pollution, and climate change. I can give an example if you guys are still typing. So for example, I have an image here of some sea stars that we saw at White Cliff. So because this is a place that we are still learning about, my partner, who was also in Oceanwise Youth, taught me how to do community science or participate in community science with very straightforward surveys of sea stars, because we do have sea star wasting in BC. And so, which is the threat, and then the surveys are how you can help stop it. So being able to identify if it's threatening your favorite or your local body of water. And we were able to bring this knowledge out with us to our field trip at Blackie Spit and Crescent Beach, and being able to identify if it was affecting the starfish over there as well. So yeah. And then, yeah, if you had questions, you're more than welcome to start asking questions as well. If you're not comfortable sharing your closing reflection, which is totally okay too. So they can be pretty personal. If anyone was interested in like the personal documents that I create for some of these activities, you're more than welcome to email me. I put my email at the top of the resource document. And then if you had any activities that you think I would enjoy or some feedback, I'm always looking for ideas too. If any of you are educators, I'm sure you know it's a very creative process trying to come up with lessons that aren't boring. And so I definitely don't like to teach boring, because then I am also bored, and it's just not a good cycle. So if you have ideas for me, I would love to hear them as well. Sure, yeah, we'll hang out for about 5 more minutes if you had any questions. If not, that's okay. Sorry if I talked fast. I was a little nervous. But yeah, otherwise I consider that a success.
I thought it was great. Okay, like we need background music.
Like a little elevator music. All right, we might close up if there's no questions, but sometimes I totally get if it takes a second for questions to come to mind after thinking about things. So I have no problem answering emails if you wanted to email me again with questions, or if you're looking for activities or documents, or to offer me some advice, that would be really lovely. But otherwise, have a nice rest of your day wherever you guys are. Maybe Frankie can wave her hand.
Thanks for joining. Goodbye.
Bye.